And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and this is video 3 of my Emulation Journey chronicling series. This specific episode is about how I learned to find, name, and understand ROMs. Hopefully you're enjoying the series. Quick overview as usual. This series is not a technical guide, although it does get quite technical, but this isn't something you should follow in terms of technically how to do emulation. It will, however, show you how to learn to do emulation and also how to troubleshoot tricky issues that other people don't talk about. This is a chronicle of one man's journey from knowing absolutely nothing to learning, to be honest, what I would consider to be a shitload about emulation. So as a result, I'll be covering what I learned, how I learned it, and where to find more resources. I'm going to cover all the areas that I think are relevant and that I wish other people had covered before I started. And specifically, this is a guide of how to fuck around and find out how to learn about emulation. Every single video for this series is going to start with a disclaimer saying I will not be providing links to any ROMs at all. But that said, the last video and in fact this video will kind of address that a bit. And in that spirit, what I'm going to do is just call out the elephant in the room. Until recently, a great place to get ROMs for free from the internet was the Internet Archive, as shown here. The Internet Archive is a free charity. It's the same people that own the Wayback Machine and do a lot of other kind of really useful online archiving. And this used to be a really helpful, useful place where you could just go on and just find a ROM or some BIOS packs or whatever bits and pieces you might need really easily. That is no longer the case. The Internet Archive has now locked down its entire ROM section, and in order to have access, you need to have a membership, which you have to prove your identity and your age and a variety of other things and log in and have an account. Otherwise, as you can see, all these items here have a padlock next to them, meaning that I can't click on them and I can't download them, which is a shame because previously there were like literally tens of thousands of free ROMs, all very well organized, all virus-free, legitimate ROMs available on the Internet Archive to download if you wished. I'm not going to lie, I did use the Internet Archive a bit to get some of the gaps in my collection plugged up, and I'm very lucky that I did that prior to the Internet Archive locking down, which it did about a year ago as part of a whole series of pretty authoritarian moves on the internet that are happening that are currently being embodied in what's called the Online Safety Act here in the UK, where basically it really is driving people into the position where they have to use VPNs and be extremely careful about their online action and privacy because everything is monitored, and Nintendo, as well as a lot of other places, are extraordinarily litigious in a really toxic and unhelpful way. So unfortunately, the Internet Archive was really useful, but no longer is. In that case, where do I get my ROMs from? Well, what you can see here is something I've shown before, the Super Console X Pro, which I bought off eBay. The last video in this series was literally talking through how I bought it, what I did with it, what was on it, and so on. But what I want to do in this video is show you what is actually on the SD card for the Super Console X Pro. I'm going to dive into it in a load of detail. I haven't seen anyone else on the internet do this. And I personally found it really useful to learn more about ROMs by doing this. So, on the assumption that you've gone online, you've picked up a Super Console X or an equivalent, some kind of random thing of Amazon packed with 20,000 ROMs or 114,000 ROMs or whatever, and you want to have an idea of how it works, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the SD card. And I'm going to show you in detail what it looks like in real life. Okay, quick detour. I was going to do this whilst doing a screen capture of the folder tree, but then it turned out that the software I used got confused by that and it didn't record the thing that I'm showing you now. What I'm showing you now is what happens if I just select the games partition I have on my SSD, which is for the original SCX Pro. I right click and I go into properties. If I do that, it adds up everything on there. And as you can see, there was 219 gigabytes of data on this SD card that I got, or the Sung Sam SD card that I got with my Super Console X Plus. 219 gig of data. As you can see, it has 113,250 files. Now, whoever made this, whoever flash cloned this and made the Super Console X in China and shipped it onto AliExpress and it got to eBay and eventually got through to me, all they've done is this, and then this is how they've advertised it. So they've done right-click properties. They see 113,000 items, so they're advertising it as 114,000 games. That is not accurate, as we're about to see in just a moment. All right, and here we have it. This is the exact copy of the all the stuff in the games partition for the original SCX Pro. It's worth keeping in mind there was another partition on the SD card which wasn't called games, it was called something else. I didn't put that onto my own personal hard drive because it wasn't really very helpful. But just so you're aware, this is why I was talking in the last video about learning how to copy SD card images rather than copy and paste. However, what I have done in this is I have taken the SD card from the original, I popped it into my computer, and I copied everything over, which is the 219 gig of things you can see in these three folders. We'll start here with bezels. There was nothing in here. We'll then start here into overlays priority. There was nothing in here. All the magic happens in the ROMs folder. But again, to stress, it's not as if you can just copy these three folders to come in an SD card and they'll work in a device. There was another partition that had all the operating software in there, like, for example, all the emulators and the front end and all the things that we talked about over the last couple of videos. But putting that to one side, we're just talking about ROMs today. If we go into ROMs, this is what we see. It is a list alphabetically of all the consoles that Emulec allows you to use. So to give you an idea, let's go into Atomis Wave. For those of you that know, Atomis Wave has a small number of games, something like 7 or 8 games, something ever created for this console. But as you can see here, there is a shitload of random stuff in here. So let's just go back for a second. If we look at Atomis Wave there, it's 776 meg. There's all these other things in here that are kind of floating around. I would do a property search to kind of show you the number of items and the volumes they take up, but it wouldn't show up on the screen capture software. So if we dive back in, what we can see here, it's got this game Dolphin, which is actually Dolphin Blue, but then it has the NVMem and the NVMem2 file. What are these? Well, I can tell you right now, those are non-essential files. Those are save state files. You got Fist of the North Star and then some Fist of the North Star save state files. The same here. All these NVMem, NVMem2 files, if I filter it by type, all of these are irrelevant. None of these matter. And here already what we're looking at is 14 unnecessary items. How many games do we have? Well, we've only got 7 games. What is this? Well, the game list is something created when you put it into the emulation front end. When you do a review of game list, you press a button, and what it will do, it will take all the games and it will create them into a game list here, which is a text document. I'm not going to open it here because, again, the screen capture software won't show it. But ultimately, a game list will have a list of all these things in here, and it's how the front end knows how to curate all the games and then how to scrape pictures and artwork for them. On that note, when you do some scraping, these two folders here get automatically created. The first one automatically scrapes these images. So there are 7 images for the 7 games, and it titles them, and screen scraper software will do that. We covered that in yesterday's video. And it will also scrape videos. Now, for some reason, there's a video in here. This video is 967 kilobytes. That's 1 meg. That's not a game. But if you consider the way this console has been advertised, this is one of the 113,250 items. So this one clearly is just a video that we don't need. If you want to have it and scrape it, by all means you can do, but you don't need to. And then we also know that these 7 also aren't games. That's 8 things that aren't games, 9 things that aren't games, plus 14 things that aren't games. So you have 23 non-gaming related items and 7 actual games. So what would I do if I wanted to tidy this up? Well, I would delete all these. That's absolutely harmless. And to be fair, they're just creating clutter on my hard drive for no reason. And to be honest, I'd probably keep the images because I just end up re-scraping them. But I would delete the videos because I don't use videos when I scrape. I think it creates like a awkwardly large and cumbersome front end. So that's a Thomas Wave. Let's have a look at something else. Let's look at Game Gear, for example. Right, wow, we've got loads of stuff in here. We've got SRM files. Again, these are types of save file. The Game Gear uses them, the SNES uses them, etc., etc. Then we've got loads of games. Fantastic. Here we've got the game list, And again, as I said, this is automatically generated every time you do a game collection. So if you delete this game list file, which is only 340 kilobytes, then when you put this into your front end and you press the update game collection button, it will regenerate this file. So delete it or keep it, it's up to you. Yeah, we've got loads of ROMs here. This is fantastic. We've got 268 items. And of those 268 items, it looks like 263 of them are games. One of them was our game list file. One of them is this memory file, another save game file, and then we have videos and images. But let's look at the videos and images. Right, there's all these. Jesus Christ. So again, when you do a search on this SD card and you look at how many items there are, these are the things that come up. These aren't ROMs. These are just cover art images. I'm not saying you don't need them. They do make for a nicer experience, absolutely. And if you didn't have them, you'd want a setup scraper and you'd want to scrape these images anyway. So that's absolutely fine. But they're not ROMs. Also, within this downloaded images folder, there's a folder here, default images. I've no idea what that even is. You will find a lot of random crap in here. Let's go to downloaded videos. There's none. Right. I don't know why they bothered having that folder. Let's go back out to ROMs, and if you go down a little bit, we'll see Game Gear H. Now, when you see a H, what that means, it's a hack. So that would be Game Gear games that have been patched or hacked by sort of non-official people, normal members of the, I won't say members of the public, but people in the community that have hacked them in particular ways. You have Game Gear hacks. So here you've got GBA H, which is GBA Game Boy Advance hacks, Game Boy Color hacks, Game Boy hacks, Genesis hacks. You get the idea. I know this probably seems a little bit opaque, but once you've been doing it for as long as I have, you can just see these things and straight away go, yep, that's a hack, that's not a hack. So let's look at GBA. We've got Game Boy Advance games, and again, we're getting used to it now. We've got a random memory file of 1 kilobyte. That's an absolute waste of space. We don't need that. Other than that, we've got loads and loads and loads of ROMs. I don't even know what this desktop configuration setting is. That's garbage. You don't need that, trust me. Anyway, loads of ROMs. Let's skip back up to the top, and then you've got your images, bajillions of images, or rather 1,066 images. How many games were there? 1,086 games. Okay, that's fair enough. And then there's like subfolders. You've got logos. God knows why. Default images, again, don't know what that is. PTBR. Now, what this means is this is Brazil specific images for Brazil specific games. We'll get into regions in just a second. And then you've got this other folder, hashtag Japan hashtag, with Japanese specific images. One thing I will point out is that you don't need to actually have subfolders. That there's no harm in me getting this, taking all these images and sticking them elsewhere, and putting them in downloaded images. I don't know why they bothered subbing the images out into little subfolders, but that is what they've done. Anyway, that's 1,086 GBA games. So let's look at Game Boy Advance hacks. Oh, we've got none. Okay, that wasn't a good example. Okay, let's try Game Boy Color hacks. Also none. God damn it. Game Gear hacks. Are any hacks on this? I'm sure there were. I'm sure I came across some. Maybe it was SNES hacks or something. Let me just check. Are there SNES hacks? SNES. No. Right. Well, hack files would go in the H files. Obviously, they didn't go in here. But when you do get hack files, those are often bootleg files and things like that. This is a terrible example. I haven't been able to show you at all how it works. But take my word for it, that's what these H suffixes are on these. As you can tell, everyone, I'm not as polished as Retro Game Core or Wolf Den. Okay, so what else do we have going on here? 3DO, Amiga. I mean, the 3DO is empty. Let's try Atari 28600, 647 games. I didn't want any of these, so I would just delete all of these. To be honest, that's the way I roll. And that's what you can do here. You can delete whatever console you don't like. What other stuff did I want to show you? Let's look at Genesis. There's some interesting stuff here that's worth looking at. So if we go here, right, no, this isn't a great example, other than saying, again, we have our random save files. And here we've got a media folder, which has folders within it for some reason. God knows what that is. And then the images go there and the videos go there. Keep in mind, again, for all of these, like these images here, 868 of them, these are not games. These are not ROMs, but they would have been counted in that 114,000 game total that I went for. Let's get out of Genesis. Let's have a look at another thing. Right, here we are. So when we're looking here, what you'll notice is the naming convention on ROMs, and this is an important one to look at. So this is what's called a no intro naming convention, which means that it doesn't start off with words like the alien syndrome or the arch rivals or things like that. So that's the first thing. It also won't have stuff like or even an American tale or things like that. What it'll do, it'll have those words at the end. It doesn't have the naming convention where those things come first. I'm trying to find an example here. Here you are. Lucky Dime Caper starring Donald Duck, comma, the. Lost World, comma, the Jurassic Park. So that's what it meant by a no intro naming convention. Otherwise, you have a huge number of your games all in either T, because they start with the, or A, because they start with A. Another interesting thing here is the region convention. So you'll notice that in brackets, it'll have behind it what region it is. So drop zone is Europe. This is USA and Europe. This is Europe only. USA and Europe, and so on. And from this, you can see what region a game is from. Now, obviously, all of these are American or European, but sometimes you do get lots of other ones, and we will talk about those in just a sec. Oh, here we are. We have world, which means it's like the only global release there is of it. Let's see what other ones we can find. I'm going to go down to SNES because I think there's quite a lot of Japanese stuff in SNES. Ah, just so you know, where it says proto, that means it's a prototype ROM. So the game may never have been released or it may have been changed substantially before getting released. You'll notice here it also has in brackets after it the language. So this is English and Spanish. Some ROMs will do that. ROMs in the generation we're looking at here, which is generation 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, don't often do that. But especially when you get to like PS2, PS3 games and so on, they'll often be split by language just because the amount of voiceover and language and dubbing is so substantial, you actually get different releases in different languages. So you'll get one in Portuguese and one in Italian, one in English and so on. So always keep an eye out what's written in the brackets behind the thing. Here you'll notice it says Revolution 1 or Rev 1 or rather Revision 1. So in this case, Bulls versus Blazers in the NBA playoffs, it's an American ROM and it's Revolution 1. Sometimes it'll say Rev A as well. In other words, that means it's the first version of that ROM. If you get a choice between a Rev 1 and a Rev 2, always go for a Rev 2 because it's a later, more up-to-date, more accurate ROM. If you get a choice between a Rev A and a Rev B, always go for the Rev B for the same reason, or even the Rev C or the Rev D. Here you can see some more breakdowns of the languages involved, and here again, English, French, DE, I think that's German and Italian. And here's another prototype ROM here. I know I'm zipping through it all quite quickly, but there's a lot to cover. Here we have another Revolution 1, or Revision 1 rather. Another Revision 1 here with some English there. And as you can see here, we've got Revision 2 for Donkey Kong Country. That's the save file, SRM, and this is the actual ROM itself. Let's see if we can find the Japanese ones. I think there's a whole load in PC Engine. There we are. Yeah, you see here, these are all Japanese. There's loads of them, and they're all Japanese, basically. That's fine. But yeah, this gives you an idea. This is what these are used for. Similarly here, we've got a save file. That's just an item which shouldn't exist and doesn't exist. More save files here. Downloaded images. We've got 290 downloaded images here. From scraping, we've got downloaded videos. You've got none of those, etc. Let's just take a moment here and pause. You're starting to see the massive number of non-ROM related items on here. And there are loads of non-ROM related items on here. This is why these things are advertised as saying there's 20,000 ROMs on the console. There's not. There's probably actually about 8,000. And of those, a lot of them are going to be garbage. I'll show you exactly what I mean. Arcade here has 2,552 items and all this stuff here, like all these random folders up here, of which, by the way, you don't need any of these. NVRAM, empty for a start. Samples, empty. What else do we have here? HI file, no. Do any of these have anything in? Yeah, you don't need any of this stuff. Trust me. I found out by deleting it and seeing what happened, basically. And then obviously the image store of almost 3,000 items in this, none of which are needed. The games themselves, a lot of these games are garbage. My personal MAME collection, which we'll look at later on in this series, is about 500 games. Less than that, I think. But there's 2,500 games here. And zipping through them and working out which ones you want to keep and which ones you don't does take some time. But there's 2,500 games here in Arcade, but the Arcade folder, as I recall, is basically identical to the MAME folder. So in here, most of the games that we just looked at are actually the exact same games here. So look at this one here. We have 64 Street, which is the exact same game we just saw in the Arcade section. I'll just show you to prove it. '64 Street here. There are just loads of overlap. So of these 2,500 games, probably about 1,900 of these are in the MAME folder as well. So you've just got duplicates for no good reason. Look at all these folders here. You've got a folder here specifically for Mortal Kombat. There's no need for there to be a separate folder here. Again, it just adds unnecessary depth to your SD card and your folder structure. Those 5 or 4 ROMs could just be here with the rest of them, similar with Simpsons and similar with TMNT. It makes absolutely no sense for them to be separate. Obviously, you've got the usual garbage folders here of stuff you just don't need, thousands of things that just aren't necessary. What we have here in the video section is 44 videos, which all take up, a meg or two at least, that are just unnecessary. Unless, of course, you want videos on your marquee as you sort of scroll through on the TV. But do you? Don't you? Either way, do you want to be misled into being told that these are games? These aren't. There aren't 114,000 games. I can't stress that enough. When we get into the games, you can see all the different games here. Now, there are lots of different versions of the same game that you'll find here. Let's move down to, let's look at Art of Fighting, for example. Where is Art of Fighting? Right, Art of Fighting isn't here. Let's try, what's the next one that we should try? Maybe King of Fighters? Right. King of Fighters also. Oh, here we are. Oh, here we are. Here, so this is Knights of Valor. We've got Knights of Valor, Knights of Valor 2, Knights of Valor 2 Plus, Knights of Valor Plus, Knights of Valor, and this is a really weird suffix because it's some kind of weird hack special edition, as is this one, Knights of Valor with some other special edition. By the way, you're probably wondering how I knew that immediately that this is Knights of Valor. This is part of the whole thing about just fucking around and finding out. This is just how you learn these things. Let's zoom down to Street Fighter. Let's see what's going on in the Street Fighter space. Um, Is there a lot of Street Fighter? The Street Smart. Maybe it's SF something. I would have sworn there was a lot of SF or Street Fighter stuff. Well, it doesn't appear to be. That's annoying. I thought there was loads of this. But this is the sort of thing I mean. There are lots of different versions of the same game. So here we've got Striker 1945J. That means Japan. Um, I don't think I'm giving this the best explanation in the world, but I guess what I'm saying is that for every game that you think is on here, there's often random versions. This is Simpsons, and this is Simpsons 2 Plus, I think. And one of these is going to be a knockoff or some kind of weird, not very good version of the other. That's kind of generally the case with MAME and Arcade, but also it's worth pointing out that's also the name of the game with Final Burn. Aha, right, here we are. This is the one I was looking for. These are all the Street Fighter versions. Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, Championship Edition, Hyper Fighting, Alpha, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. Street Fighter Zero, maybe? I don't know. I don't know. They all look reasonably legit. Let's see if there's any Street Fighters down in the actual S's. Yeah, there's more. Street Fighter again, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, 3, 2, 3, 3. So my point is that already in Final Burn, you've got duplicate Street Fighter games, and you've got some Street Fighter games that appear to be illegitimate hacks. And as well as that, there were probably Street Fighter games over in Arcade as well. So this is all in Final Burn Neo. Final Burn Neo is actually very, very similar often to what you find in the Neo Geo file. So let's look here in Neo Geo. Oh, we've got these things here: Art of Fighting, random stuff here, Fatal Fury, Metal Slug. There's no need for all these to be in their own little subfolders. Um, it's all a bit of a complicated mess, and I appreciate it feels like kind of like rabbited on a bit and rushed through from one side to the other and so on. But there's so much to cover and so much that I learned doing this that it's kind of hard to know where to start and to finish. I guess just before I finish recording this little section here is just to point out a couple of things. All the consoles you can imagine are here, and the EmuElec Wikipedia, or wiki page rather, shows all that. There are literally tens of thousands of items that aren't games that are counted as games when these things are advertised. So here in Wonder Swan Color, we're looking at loads of different types of save files, the game list file, of course, random other bits and pieces, and then, of course, all the images and videos and subfolders and so on that goes with it. All garbage. I would recommend deleting it all, getting rid of the games you don't like, and then rescraping. In addition to having all the consoles that you want or don't want, and having loads of crap that you don't need in there, even in the consoles you like, you will find hacks, you will find duplicates. It's not unusual to find things where you'll have the USA ROM and then you'll have the identical European ROM. That does happen as well. So if we look here at Nintendo DS, we see this a fair bit. So we've got 3 game pack Europe, 3 game pack USA, 4 game pack Europe, 4 game pack USA. So about of these 4,040 Nintendo DS games, most of them aren't actually worth shit. They're not actually worth keeping at all. This is, I think, brain train. I think that because I don't speak French. I mean, I studied French, but that was decades ago. So I assume all 4 of these games are French only. So fucking delete these. Um, when it comes to Advanced Wars, in case you weren't aware, Dark Conflict is what it was called in Europe. The same game was called Days of Ruin in USA. And obviously, there's 2 versions of Dual Strike, the European and USA one. Spoiler warning, they're both in English. Marginally, if you want to save a bit of memory, maybe you want to go for the one that's the USA one because it only has English. So it's a slightly smaller file by the scale of about 2 meg. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. My point is, you will find all these kind of duplicates, waste, chaff, messing around. It is a nightmare. In addition, one thing I would point out is that the arcade folder is almost identical to the main folder, and they both run using the same emulator. It's an unnecessary duplicate, and I ended up deleting everything from the arcade folder and just binning it. And then I tidied up the main folder. On a separate note, the Final Burn Neo folder is basically identical to the Neo Geo folder. Again, I got rid of everything in the Neo Geo folder, threw it in the Final Burn folder, and left it there. The Neo CD folder is a total waste of space. These games are massive and are essentially identical to the versions that are on the normal Neo Geo. But again, we'll talk about that in a later video when I talk about the pros and cons of different consoles or different bits of hardware over others. Personally, I prefer using a Final Burn to using Neo Geo, and I never use Neo Geo CD because all these are extremely large versions of Neo Geo games with marginally better sound, as far as I'm concerned. You can see here on the names got these slightly weird naming conventions. They're Japanese. They've got different version numbers. There's a lot to learn and a lot to unpick. Here you can see all the pictures for them as well. We could talk about this forever. We could talk about this all day. I don't want to do that. There's a lot more to cover in this video. But what I am saying is, ladies, gentlemen, others, this is what you find when you get the SD card or whatever the preloaded ROM library is out of one of these janky, weird, sketchy plug and play devices. This is what they look like. This is how they work and how they're structured. And this is where you can start off making your own collection. You go to PSX, these are PlayStation games, PS1 games. They're in a variety of different file states. So these are memory files. This is a type of ROM file, and PBP is a different type of ROM file. And these are all things that we're going to talk about in just a second. But my point is, if you want to learn where to get ROMs, if you want to know what ROMs to get and which ones to keep and which ones to delete and what to tidy up and what not to tidy up, there are better places to start, but there are much worse places to start. Best of luck. Phew, that was a bit of a slog. Unfortunately, we've got a fair bit more to go because I want to cover quite a lot in today's video to do a ROM. So I guess we're probably going to get nearer to about 40 or 50 minutes long at least. Hope you've got a snack and a drink. Hope you get the snack and drink reference and you've been watching some of the YouTube videos I've been recommending. Let's go straight into it. Another thing you need to understand about ROMs is you have a finite amount of size or whatever storage media you take. SD cards, USBs maybe, but hard drives, everything. ROMs take up space. And what you want to do is convert them into the most efficient but smallest file size you can. This image here is from the Retro Game Core website, and it is a snapshot of a guide he has on there. There's also a video he does with the same thumbnail, which is an excellent video to show you all the different types of file formats and file compression methodologies that you can use to convert your ROMs into smaller, tighter formats. The first thing I would say is most of the ROMs that I was just showing you from the Super Console X, leave as they are, leave them zipped, it's fine. Most emulators and most hardware now is so relatively powerful to things like Mega Drive and SNES that it can just unzip them and use them instantaneously. You don't need to do anything to make them easier or more accessible, and you don't need to compress them because the games are tiny. However, when you get into larger games, so even like PS1, let alone PS2 and so on, the game file sizes get big, hundreds of megs, if not 1 or 2 or 3 gig. And so there's a few things to keep in mind. One, you want to convert them into something smaller. And as well as converting them to something smaller, you don't want them to be zipped because the time it takes to unzip, say, a 3 gig file is substantial and emulators can't deal with it as well as running the game. So what I would recommend doing is checking out the Retro Game Core video on this on different file types and what to convert things to. There's a couple of tips I'm just going to throw up here just so you know. Firstly, one of the things he recommends is a bit of software called NAMDHC, which is used to convert normal rips of files like ISO rips and disk rips and so on. It converts those into a compressed format called CHD, which stands for compressed hunk of data. It's a really useful bit of software. And so what I would recommend you do is that you understand how to convert stuff to CHD format, and you do that with all of your stuff. PSP, PS1, PS2, Saturn, Dreamcast. If you have 100 games, you will save easily 100 gig in room. So it's well worth doing. A couple of notes on using NAMDHC. It has to be connected to the internet. Otherwise, it throws up an error message. You can skip the error message and continue, but just so you know. Every time you close it, you need to delete the config file that it creates before you reopen it. Otherwise, the settings will go a bit weird. It requires the initial software called CHDman in the same folder for it to work. But again, you'll understand that when you watch Russ's video. And it requires a flat folder hierarchy. You need to move all your Q files and bin files into one folder. Again, Russ's video will explain that, but to cut a long story short, when you've got a CD-based ROM, sometimes it's what they call an ISO, which is like a snapshot image of the disk, but sometimes it's split into what they call Q bin files, where you'll have a really small file called a Q file, and then several large files that could be hundreds of meg in size called bin files. And they all need to be combined and melted together to form a CHD file if you want to save room. On that note, and this is a pro tip, if you're using a Dreamcast, you'll have bin files, Q files, and GDI files. You can just delete the GDI file and just use the Q or bin format in order to make your CHD. Sometimes instead of a GDI file, you have a CDI file. They are also the same thing. You can use either one of those or just delete them, they're fine. I've got all these notes up on the screen for you to use as well because I think it's important to kind of capture all this. This is for my personal notes because I made a bit of an emulation Bible for my own reference, and these are from that. So screenshot it, freeze it, use it, or ignore it. It's entirely up to you. On that note, in terms of Wii and GameCube compression, I tried using Dolphin to convert those games to RVZ format, as Russ recommends. That didn't work. For GameCube, my ROMs were already what they call CISO, so CISO format instead of ISO format, so I didn't need to do anything. For the Wii, my ROMs were WBFS format, which it couldn't be compressed to RVZ. So whether or not it's worth using Dolphin is kind of up to you. What I will point out is that for the GameCube, having the RVZ format did make massive space savings, like 90% space savings. But for the Wii, the WBFS format was fine. Compressing it further just seemed a bit negligible, a bit of a waste of time. That's everything on formats and compression and things like that. What I now want to touch on as a completely separate point, so keep this clear in your head, as a completely separate point, I want to touch on Naomi Games emulation. Naomi is an arcade board. I think it was made by Sega. And as well as having the normal like zip ROM file, a lot of Naomi games require a separate CHD file, which can be really big, like several hundred megabytes, in the same folder as the zip. A few other arcade games need this. So, for example, Killer Instinct on MAME needs to have a CHD file, as do some of the later MAME light gun games. You'll have to Google that and learn a bit about that. But in terms of naming the Naomi CHD, it is a bit tricky. So what I'm showing you now is a screen capture for Sega Naomi 2. Naomi 2 is all pretty much the same. And I'm showing you a screen capture of that from the Internet Archive way back in the day before it got locked down. You can see all the Naomi games here. This is Guilty Gear XX, and this is where the CHD is. You'll notice it's 240 meg, and it's actually for some reason called GDL-0011. That's what it's called, and that's what you have to make sure you keep it named as. Similarly, if you look at Ikaruga, that's called GDL-0010. There's no way to kind of guess what they're called. It's not an alphabetic system to do with the numbers or anything. The numbers just are what they are, which is weird and strange. But the important thing is that when you actually put them into your actual folder on your SD card or onto your device, that you name them correctly. In addition to that, here is a screenshot of exactly how they're meant to look. So this is how the folder tree should look. And it is admittedly a bit weird. You have to know which ones go where, and they have to be named correctly. This was a weird thing for me to learn. This took me a while, and no one really explained it very well on the internet. I don't even know if I've explained it very well. But what I would say is when you're doing Naomi, you need the CHD files, you need to track them down. Best of fucking luck, given the Internet Archive is now closed for business, and they need to be named and located correctly. It is tricky. This guidance here is hopefully a starter. Naomi games are great. I would recommend them, by the way. Like they are like absolutely awesome. Okay, with that out of the way, there's a couple of sort of general points I wanted to talk about. So the first one is something kind of teasing what we're going to be doing in video 11, which is super refining our ROM set. So our ROM libraries are tight and efficient and slick, and I've got no faff or fat or waste. We live in a time where many titles are either cross-platform, so they can be on the SNES and the Mega Drive, or have been later released in an improved format on a later, better system. So they might have been on the PS1 and then come out on the PS2 later. We can define a better system as more powerful, like PS1 to PS2, but we can also define it as simply more consistently easy to emulate. For example, the awesome shoot 'em up game In the Hunt is on MAME and on Final Burn Neo, but personally, I'd recommend it on the PS1 because it's just much easier to emulate, much less faff. It does, however, take up more room. If it's a game that's on PS1 and Sega Saturn, I would always recommend it on PS1 because it's easier to emulate on lower powered devices. Removing these needless duplicates will both tidy up your collection, which personally means a lot to me, and will also save room, which honestly will mean a lot to everyone. That said, you might be a collecting purist, and a collecting purist, what we can call a Type P collector or a Type P comic reader as well, would want to compare the differences between, for example, X-Men vs. Street Fighter on MAME, Final Burn Neo, Neo Geo CD, Saturn, and PS1. You might be a massive fan, you might want it on all those different consoles. I'm a Type J collector, so I'm just keeping it on the PlayStation. In fact, I think I actually have it on my Switch, so I might not bother retro emulating it at all. We're going to talk a lot more about real deep dive refinements of your ROM collection in video 11 in this series. But for now, we're just going to kind of pause on it there. What I will say is that I eventually improved on the library that you've seen by cutting it down to around 4,000 or so games, which is what it was down to by the time I gave it to my friend in yesterday's video when I boxed up the Super Console X. In doing so, there are a few key principles that I learned, and I'm just going to throw these out here so you see it and you know. Firstly, I learned that NTSC is generally considered to be preferable to PAL in format. There's several reasons for this. NTSC tends to only be English language, so the files are technically a bit smaller, at least on more advanced systems. That said, using PAL for more advanced systems can mean they run on weaker hardware because PAL games run at a slightly slower rate. I also learned to remove the overlaps from my Genesis folder, my Mega Drive folder, and my Mega Drive Japan folder. And that allowed me to remove something like 1,500 ROMs because there were just loads that were duplicates. I used this website to remove obvious bootlegs and hacks. This wiki is really useful, it's really helpful. And when you find a game and you're like, this feels a bit weird, or it's not like scraping images for some reason, or I can't find any information about it, check Bootleg Games Wiki. You'll often discover it's a bootleg. I flattened all my folders, so I removed all the hashtag subfolders that you saw earlier. So Art of Fighting, Street Fighter, that sort of stuff. I removed all those just to flatten my folders. The subfolders have no impact, and it just made things messy and confusing. When I went through tidying up my janky, sketchy ROM library from AliExpress, I used this website, fileinfo.com, which I don't know who makes this, and I don't know why on earth they want this. But they've made it and they're interested in it. And you type in what a file extension is, and it will tell you what it is. It'll say this is a critical file for running a Final Burn Neo game, or this is an unnecessary save file for a Game Boy Color game, all that sort of stuff. It's a really useful website. Speaking of which, here is a list of all the file types that I personally just pulled out of there, knowing that they were not useful or that they could be deleted and it had no harm. So here's a snapshot here just to show you some of my research. At the end of the day, after I streamlined everything down, like I say, it was down to about 4,000 games as a streamlined Super Console X, and I sent that to my friend, although that still couldn't pay Sega Saturn games because it's not able to run Saturn games at all. And I did actually refine that library down substantially more in the months and years to come. The final thing I want to touch on, and this is something that you'll probably come across on Reddit or various other bits and pieces, is what they call the 1G 1R process or the eager process. 1G 1R is one game, one ROM. I found out about this relatively late on in my emulation experience, like maybe 6 or 7 months in. But essentially, there are a range of different softwares, different apps, different processes, different whatevers that you can unleash on your ROM library that automatically tidy it up. That's what one game, one ROM stands for. It basically makes sure you only have one game for each ROM you have. So if you have 15 different versions of Street Fighter that are in 15 different languages and 3 of them are hacks and so on and so forth, it will go through them all automatically. It will find the original legitimate English language version and it will delete all the rest. And it does that for all the ROMs across all your systems. So all the duplicates we talked about, where I had about 1,800 duplicates from the main folder that were also in the arcade folder, it would get rid of those. I say that in theory. I've no idea how the fuck this works. I've never used it. I've never wanted to use it. Maybe had I learned about it early in the day, I would have done. But frankly, going through and learning stuff manually is really a key part for learning all around. Like I say, fuck around, find out. It was slow, it was tedious, it was hard going, but it really helped me understand my ROM library. And hopefully, after this long, tedious, detailed video, you have a better idea how to understand your ROM library too. Hopefully this was useful, everyone. We're going to carry on this long, tedious process tomorrow, or in the next couple of days at least, with another installment of the chronicle of my retro emulation journey. Hope you're enjoying it. Leave comments down below, like, comment, subscribe if you're interested in content more than games, because remember, this is normally a comic book channel. And yeah, until next time, stay classy, y'all.